accepted by the leaders of his day, and Laudus describes his plight as that of a social outcast. Mahavira and even Buddha, whose ministry is glorified by later traditions, was abused and ridiculed as they wandered from town to town. Yet even more profound than the pains and travails which they suffered in the body was the inner agony of loneliness as these founders wandered about, with no one to understand them or sympathize with their minds. Their only solace was their single-minded devotion to God, or their conviction about the truth, which they alone in the world could understand. From Christianity, a scribe came up to him and said, "Teacher, I will follow you wherever you go." Jesus said to him, "Foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head." And with that one, I want to tell you something. The term that Jesus frequently used when he referred to himself was the Son of Man. That term in his day meant an ordinary man. That is how he referred to himself. From Islam, the messenger says, "O my Lord, behold, my people have taken this Quran as a thing to be shunned. Even so, we have appointed to every prophet an enemy from among the sinners. But your Lord suffices as a guide and a helper." From Buddhism. At one time, Buddha was staying in the town of Kosambi. In this town, there was one who resented him and who bribed wicked men to circulate false stories about him. Under these circumstances, it was difficult for his disciples to get sufficient food from their begging, and there was much abuse. Ananda said to Buddha, "We had better not stay in a town like this. There are other and better towns to go to. We had better leave this town." The Blessed One replied, "Suppose the next town is like this. What shall we do then?" Then we moved to another. The Blessed One said, "No, Ananda, there will be no end in this way. We had better remain here and bear the abuse patiently until it ceases, and then we move to another place. There are profit and loss, slander and honor, praise and abuse, suffering and pleasure in this world. The enlightened one is not controlled by these external things. They will cease as quickly as they come." This is from Confucianism. Confucius went on to Cheng, and the master and the disciples lost track of each other. While Confucius stood alone at the east gate of the outer city, the natives reported to Dekong, "There is a man at the east gate whose forehead is like that of Emperor Yao, whose neck resembles that of an ancient minister, Keyao. He looks crestfallen like a homeless wandering dog." Dekong told Confucius this story, and Confucius smiled. And he said, "I don't know about the description of my figure, but as for resembling a homeless wandering dog, he is quite right. He is quite right." And this last one was written by Sun Young Moon of the Unification Church, and it is quite extensive, so I'm just going to read part of it. "I have tasted prison life, not only under the communist regime, but also in free Korea. I can never forget one former member who came up to me when I was being taken to the Westgate prison in Seoul. He looked at me and laughed scornfully. "You fool, are you still doing that stupid thing?" I can never forget that man. At that moment, I did not say anything to him, but in my heart I prayed, "God, give me a chance to testify to how righteous you are and how I was obedient to you." This is just one instance of personal betrayal. There are too many to count. When I close my eyes and start to pray, tears always come forth. I have experienced so much agony and pain and heartbreak that I know God, and I am in a position to comfort him. Our next hymn this morning is "Love Makes a Bridge," number 325. And I have found that they have a whole lot of wonderful books and different things. And so I have been ordering on the internet some things. Yes, there's hope for me yet. And there's one particular book that I got from them. It is entitled "The Children of the Same God." And it's written by Susan J. Ritchie, who has her doctorate in cultural, historical, religious studies from Ohio University. She's a professor of UU history and ministry. And she's the parish minister at the North UU congregation in Lewis Center, Ohio. And I found this book to be very, very fascinating, because I'm still learning about a lot of the UU information. In this particular book, Ritchie talks about the historical relationship between Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Now, Unitarianism developed in a variety of boundary lands in the far outreaches of Eastern Europe in Transylvania, Poland, and Lithuania. They're far from the powers of Rome and the power centers of Luther's Germany and Calvin's Geneva. This radical Reformation was free to take its most progressive form. Those declared heretics by the Catholic or Protestant powers, or both, found refuge in these places. The Counter-Reformation, when the Catholic Church reclaimed some of its parishioners, and its properties from the Protestants took longer to reach these outer areas of Eastern Europe. And so this allowed for more radical ideas and communities to develop in those areas. Excuse me. Unitarianism developed in the shadow of the Christian Church, which had long deemed that anyone with unorthodox ideas about the nature of Jesus or the Trinity was dangerous and a heretic. These heretics were the original Unitarians. And what's interesting is these Unitarians found that their nearest theological kin were not traditional Christians. Current teachers of Unitarian history now feel that the Unitarian identity in Europe emerged as a defense of the inherent kinship between Christianity and Islam and Judaism. Thus, Unitarianism was multicultural and multi-religious from the very beginning. Ritchie notes that while the Unitarians in Eastern Europe had open interaction with Islamic and Jewish communities, the early Unitarian Church in North America did not. Let's face it, there were few, if any, Muslims or Jews early on in North America. You had the Native American Indians, and later on, you had the black slaves brought over from Africa. So the early churches here did not have the experience of living with and among Jews and Muslims. Instead, there was more racial and religious prejudice here in America, which for generations presented a more natural, multi-religious culture. Now, of course, the UU organization in the last number of years has made great strides in correcting this. Ritchie says about American Unitarianism, "It is hard not to be sad and puzzled by the fact that a deliberately liberal religious tradition advocating the continuity of revelation is so often discombobulated by change." Now, one of the earliest events that contributed greatly to the development of Unitarianism in Eastern Europe was the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD, which represented the first legal separation, which would, in what would become Christianity's full divorce from Judaism. This took place during the reign of Emperor Constantine, and he was the one who made Christianity the official Roman religion. He convened the Council of Nicaea at one of his palaces in order to establish a specific set of beliefs for Christianity, and which beliefs were going to be kept and which beliefs were going to be thrown out. The Roman-backed official belief became that Jesus was not a man, he was God. The doctrine of the Trinity became official, with God at the top and Jesus and the Holy Ghost below, all being part of the same Godhead. The thrust of this new doctrine of the Trinity was to make Christianity different and separate from the monolithic God worshipped by Jews, Aryans, pagans, and later on Muslims, Unitarians, Baha'is, and more. Since Nicaea, Christianity has insisted on the exclusivity of its God and has gone so far as to find Muslim and Jewish tolerance of Christianity objectionable. In a letter to all of the church bishops after the Council of Nicaea, Emperor Constantine wrote, "We ought not therefore to have anything in common with the Jews. We desire, dearest brethren, to separate ourselves from the detestable company of the Jews." And this was the beginning of the anti-Semitism that has lasted well into our lifetimes. Now, many of the Christians at the time of the Nicene Council, in particular the common people, okay, did not believe that Jesus was the same as God or that Jesus was the only Son of God. They believed that Jesus was an enlightened human being, that he was a teacher, a prophet. And they believed very strongly in one God, not a Trinity. Bishop Arius, who was a distinguished theologian and a much-loved priest of the common people, was the one who spoke out most strongly against the idea of the Trinity. He was declared to be a heretic, and his followers were called Arians. In 381, the Council of Constantinople authorized the persecution of Arians as heretics. Now, we're going to switch from early Christians to the Muslims. Early Muslims, especially the Prophet Muhammad himself, were entirely convinced of the natural kinship between Christianity, Islam, and Judaism in the form of a shared God. Insistence on the unity and the sameness of a God of many religions lay at the very heart